correctly with the correct amount.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Welcome to Me and Steve Talk RPGs, a podcast where me and my friend Steve try and help you get the most out of your role-playing game experience. What's up, Gamer Nation? Welcome back to Me and Steve. I'm here tonight with my buddy Steve.
What's up?
And before we get into something a little different we have for tonight, we want to take a moment to highlight our D20 Network Podcast of the Week. And what's it going to be this week, Steve?
We're actually going to be talking about court games. We had someone from Court Games on a little bit ago.
Yeah, Kakita, I believe, was the name she uses on the show. Yeah, Court Games is an L5R, Legend of the Five Rings podcast. They actually have three podcasts on the D20 Network. They have the Court Games podcast itself, then they have Fortune and Strife, and Crimson Gold Agonies. Now, Court Games is more, what do you want to call, game discussion around Legend of the Five Rings, be it GMing tips, lore information, that type of thing. And then the other two are actual plays. And I don't remember which one is which, but I know one of them is a little more of a, like an audio drama where they take a lot of the game mechanics out. And the other, they leave it all in to kind of give, a little more of a demonstration-y feel. So those are Court Games, Fortune and Strife, and Crimson Gold Agonies. And if you're into L5R, then probably want to go check those out.
Yeah. And even if you're like me, have a passing interest in L5R, they're definitely worth the listen. I've been definitely listening to some of the Court Games shows, and really, really interesting, really cool stuff over there. A little bit of disclaimer before we even get going on this episode. Normally I'm upbeat and moving, but today I am sick. Luckily, it's not COVID again, but it's sinus infection plus toothache equals mellow Steve.
Yeah, that's not a fun combination. I've had to deal with that more than once myself, so we'll tough it out. So what are we going to do today, Steve?
So if you're a member of our Discord, you probably saw earlier today, meaning today, Tuesday, September 14th, where Steve had put up, hey, why don't you shoot us questions for the podcast? And so that's something that, it only takes a couple seconds. Come over and join our Discord, and you get to have conversations with us, but also, we'll sometimes reach out for topic ideas, and that's pretty much what we did today. Was we just reached out for topic ideas, and we got a bunch here. So let's break into them.
All right. So how do you want to pick this? We typed up a list. Do we want to roll a die or?
Well, how many we got?
I think something like 15. A couple of those are ones that I put in there, but
there's 15 here. Yeah, we don't have an even number to really roll a die. So let's start at number 1.
Okay.
Number 1 from Agent Zero, who is awesome GM for our campaign that we've been sort of talking about. What was the craziest ending to a campaign you were actually able to play to completion? So we sort of talked about this one before the show. I don't have any great examples of this because a lot of campaigns I play to don't end in completion or end on a sort of cliffhanger.
Yeah, I'm in a lot the same boat, in all honesty. I think I've only played a handful of campaigns to an actual completion. Now, I've had some really crazy stories that came out of what amounted that generated effectively like resets in campaigns. I shared one of those back, I'm trying to scroll through and find it now. I want to say about maybe episode 18 or so. We did, I think the name of the episode was The Night That Bubba Went Crazy and Other Stories.
Yeah.
Or something along those lines. That one was fun. It wasn't a total TPK, but it did kind of conclude that chapter of the campaign and move it on to a new one. But yeah, I mean, in all honesty, it seems like most of the games I've either moved away from the group due to, life reasons, or, like a lot of games in college, well, this person left, that person left, whatever. It's not that, the game dissolved even, it's just that people moved on. And so I don't know that I have like wacky conclusions that are, I mean, I've been in several games where, so to speak, the GM kind of lost interest and went, let's go do something else.
Yeah, I have a lot of those stories where the game sort of just fizzled on its own. I don't really have any great where they ended crazy or, super awesome. A lot of mine, even the games that I run, I find myself just ending on a cliffhanger most of the time because most of the time, not always, but most of the time my players want to come back and want to play those characters again. And so this might be the end of the story for now, but it's not the end of the story forever. I'm a big fan of doing time jumps too, where you take characters and, you take a character that when the campaign ended the last time we'll use a real age, maybe they were like their mid 20s or late teens, and we pick up where they're adults, they're in their early 40s, like full-blown grown-ups and dealing with that and how those characters have aged. A lot of my stories don't end with a bang. A lot of my stories end with a bit of a cliffhanger or a whimper just because I don't know. I've never had where played in a game or run a game where it's really made sense to conclude on this big massive explosion.
That's fair. Yeah, I'm pretty much in the same boat. That being said, do we move on?
Yeah, we move on to the next question, which is from Chaz. How has recording your games changed the way you play and run? Well, I don't know about you, but personally it hasn't. It's changed a little bit, but it hasn't changed a whole lot. In my opinion, as far as when it comes to recording, most of the time it's just it's a good way to keep my players more on point and not let them wander off because you sort of go, "Hey guys, just remember we're recording this." And they, "Oh, sorry." You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think for me, in all honesty, I've played all of well, y'all have heard the 2 sessions that or well, technically 3 sessions, but the 2 games that have made it to air so far, and I was playing in both of those. We did record one session of something that kind of fizzled for various reasons, and I was running that, and we intend to revisit it. But I think for me, I don't know that it changes it, but it does in a way because I think I'm more conscious of what do you want to say? Trying to have a defined thing I want to do. I'm a little more conscious of how much table talk I do. I know GMing is a bit more anxiety, at least initially. I think that's something that will wear off in time, but it's also the factor that in cases for me, it's also been largely with people that I've not ever run for before. And so just by the nature of my personality, I'd probably tend to be a little more nervous there. And then there's also the idea that, hey, we're putting this out for everyone to see.
Yeah, that gives you a little bit of pause. I think for me, as far as table talk's concerned, even in personal games, I try my best to the table talk that I do will be at like stopping points or before we get going. Like when we played live sessions, I would try, we'd do a little bit of talking before the game would get going, but I tried to stay on point for the most part and just keep it moving.
Yeah. I think the other thing I might do is I might try and be like a little more evocative in my description, but some of that too is getting used to playing online, which has been, everything I've done that's recorded where you don't have the hand gestures and the facial expressions to convey things that you would at a table. And that's not necessarily a recording thing, but it is because I'm also a little bit conscious of the fact that anyone listening to it is not going to have the benefit of any of those things.
Yeah, I think it's definitely I agree with that. It's definitely made me play more up than I used to. Like I used to when we would play in live, I would always play a little more subdued. And now I find myself when we play online, we play these games that we're recording, I'm going a little bit more over the top on my characters, over the top on my voice and doing a little bit more than what I used to. And I think part of that's because you don't have the advantage of sitting at a table and being across from somebody and using your hand gestures and making sure you're reading their facial expressions so they understand what's being said to them.
Yeah.
And from that, we'll move on to Hagen's question, which is strangest regular play group and any fun stories. Um, I'll let you start this one off because I have like one, but
Well, strangest regular play group. I mean, it's a little bit because I find that most people I've met in the gaming community are all a bit unique. So, I don't know what to define as strangest. I think perhaps some of the fondest, if you will, unique people memories I have go back to my college days in which Hagen actually was part of that, and
Mhm.
it all centered, and I don't to this day, I don't remember necessarily specific campaign groups because there was quite a circle of us that it sort of centered around this one Call of Cthulhu game, but then it fractured and I shouldn't say fractured, but it kinda, like, split off, and some of us played this stuff together, and some of us played other stuff, and, but that was kind of like the central reference point. Not necessarily everybody in our circle of friends played in the Cthulhu game, but a lot of us did at one point or another. And there were some really unique people in there. The GM, who we all called Cthulhu Jim or just Cthulhu, and mind you, this was back in the mid '90s. But he would respond if you saw him across the street and hollered Cthulhu, he would wave at you. And this game was very out there in a lot of ways because this was the original iteration of Delta Green when it was a Call of Cthulhu supplement.
Mhm.
We had one character that someone played, and I believe this person now works in investment banking. Was a Irish assassin patterned very much after Leon from Leon the Professional. There was an individual who's now an attorney who was playing a Shaolin monk. And that individual, by the way, as far as his memories, this person had what I can only describe as troll hair. And I mean that, like, remember the little troll dolls?
Yeah, yeah. Haven't thought about those in a million years.
His hair was, like, naturally red and this kind of he could do, like, the Don King hairdo with
Mm,
nothing in his hair. Like, it was just that whatever it was, but very kind of, if you wanna call it stereotypical Irish complexion, pale freckles,
mhm,
red hair. Like I said, great friend. But that crew had quite an assortment of people, and we did a lot of crazy things together. Like we used to do this thing we called Bad Movie Night, which was kind of like our own private version of Mystery Science Theater 3000. We would get Plan 9 from Outer Space or the Kentucky Fried Movie or Attack of the Killer Tomatoes or any number of just awful, awful movies.
oh, yeah, I love the Kentucky Fried Movie, and Plan 9's a good time anytime I'm on.
I'm not saying they're not a good time, but they're not good movies.
No, they're not.
Um, and, we would get together and watch those and mock them and all kinds of fun stuff like that. And then the one other crazy thing we used to do, and I can't replicate it due to, the rating of this podcast, but we had a chant that we used to do every time that stuff really went down in the Cthulhu game, and we would all kind of look at each other, and someone would go start counting, and it'd be 1, 2, 3, bleep, bleep, bleep. So that's probably, like I said, strangest, I don't know, but probably the one I remember the most fondly and as being quite unique.
Um, I just have strange friends, just in general. And so to say, "Oh, well, yeah, this was the strangest campaign I ever played in." No, all of my campaigns were strange. Like, I played 2nd edition Dungeons& and Dragons right around the time that the Magic the Gathering set Amonkhet came out, and I was obsessed with that setting because, well, there wasn't such a thing for Dungeons& and Dragons. It was Amonkhet is sort of a, Egyptian parallel, sort of, in a way. Higher magic, but it's all got that like Egyptian theme to it. And we played Dungeons and Dragons in that, and that was a blast. And that crew just went nuts with that setting. I think about the time that I was playing with some friends of mine, and I ended up a druid who was best friends with a velociraptor.
Okay.
Well, the what had happened was somebody had basically summoned this velociraptor. Like somebody had summoned it as like a find familiar type thing. And it just sort of hung around, and I was the only one that had speak with animals. And so I was just talk to it periodically, and it was like me and him were friends, and everybody else couldn't understand what was being said, so I just seemed like my druid was crazy.
Uh-huh.
Because it was like the raptor would say something, I'd respond back, and it was like the party doesn't understand what you're saying. They just think you're making noises back at the raptor. Like, and then I would tell them, no, he thinks they're this way, and that people would just look at me like, no, I don't believe you. Like, or the time that I ran a game where a dwarf wanted to be carried around in a barrel of ale. Like, I don't know. I let it happen. I was like, you gotta give me a drowning check every now and again. Make sure you're not in there just sloshed around. But no, I just always had weird friends, and so it's hard to quantify that. Like, strangest regular play group.
That's fair.
The next one is sort of straightforward, and that is the best die.
And this is from I think they probably pronounce that Kyrie. I know who it is, but I don't know how to the name they use on our server.
I would say it's Kyrie, and if we're wrong, correct us. But I don't know. My personal favorite die is a D100, D100 percentile, which is kind of cheating. That's 2 die.
Well, so I think that's probably as far as like core resolution mechanics, it's probably my favorite. If I had to pick a die that I like the best just because of its shape, I'd probably go with the D12, and only
Hmm.
because it kind of reminds me a little more of a rock. And I don't know why that is, but like a D20 is a little more ball shaped because it's smaller facets, but a D12 kind of still has this chunkiness to it that I find aesthetically pleasing somehow.
Always a fan of the weird dice, though.
I say I've got that D34 in my bag,
Yeah, the D34.
which I actually got from Hagen, by the way.
Yeah, the proper D100s,
Yeah, golf balls.
100-sided die. There's a couple really weird ones now. D2 is always fun.
I just use a quarter.
Yeah, most people do, but if you have a D2, I roll it. Yeah, die are I always like the systems. I haven't found a good one that's not a comedy system in a long time, or specifically a comedy system. Oh, there's some really cool ones coming out of the 3D printing community, which are basically coins. They're planetary gear sets.
Okay.
So you have a sun in the middle and a bunch of planetary gears and one arrow on the coin, and you spin the outer ring, sort of like a bearing. And as it spins, each one of the planetary gears processes and rotates in a circle and then lands on the number. I'll have to show you.
That sounds kind of neat.
All right, let's move on to the next question. I'll send it to you.
Okay.
Just because I'm not going to sit here in silence while I look for this thing. So the next question is, what do you think of how tabletop is progressing with games using Kickstarter and professional DMs and celebrity games becoming a thing? And that's coming from sarcastic smiley face. I think it's a good thing, and I think it's a bad thing in some ways. What are your thoughts, Steve?
I mean, it's a big topic. I think it's good as a whole. I think it brings a lot of people in, and it's helped to remove a little bit of the stigma from the hobby, but it has also, how do I want to say this? I think it has also in some cases created expectations that aren't, I don't want to say unrealistic, but in a way they are, right? Because if you watch, and we'll point at Critical Role because they're the elephant in the room, right? If you watch or listen to Critical Role and you see how they play Dungeons and Dragons or whatever game they happen to be playing, whatever, and then you expect to go down to your local game shop and find a game and it's going to be just like Critical Role, you're going to be let down most likely. Not saying definitely, but it's more likely than not. And some of that, I think, is because, well, one, they are professional entertainers. They are putting on a production. They're all actors, so the tools that we're using to play Dungeons and Dragons or whatever game we play, and the tools that they're using to play the same type of game are the same tools. But unlike you and I, who play, a couple games a week, whatever, and that's all we really use those tools for, these are the tools that they've used to make a living for years. And so they're just going to be better at using them. Just like, if I'm working on my car in the driveway, I know how to use the tools I have and I know how to do a lot. I'm not anywhere near as efficient and effective as a professional mechanic who works on cars all day every day.
Yeah,
I think that's the quandary, so to speak.
I can completely understand and agree with you on that. I think it's a good thing in the way that it gets exposure. I just don't necessarily like what it does to new players, because new players really feel that they have to work towards that Matt Mercer, or I have to be like, it's a little bit different, and it's tough to quantify to people when they're new to the game. No, it's okay. You're doing fine. Because I've played with a couple people more recently where it was like, "Oh, I'm trying to be like this, or I'm trying to do like that," and I'm like, "No, you don't need to. Do your own thing. You are doing great. Everybody's having fun. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll try and dig it up and put a link in the, show notes for it. And you were specifically referencing Matt Mercer there, and there's a phenomenon that gets talked about every now and then called the Matt Mercer effect, which is that people feel pressure to be able to run a table like Matt Mercer. And Seth Skorkowski did a really, really, really good video on this. And like I said, I don't remember the name. I don't even remember if it actually referenced the Matt Mercer effect, but I know he talked about it. And it's a really insightful video on the topic. And like I said, I'll try and throw a link to that in the show notes, if nothing else, just so people can go and watch it because it's really good.
Yeah, and, I think it's great to use that as an advertisement tool and to be like, "Hey, look, we have these people who are interested and, this person runs our game," or using that as a tool is great, but I think it sets up unrealistic expectations sometimes.
Yeah, I would say, the biggest danger as far as the stream games is thinking that that's what the normal is. Like I've said, and I don't know if I've said it on the air, but like I actually like for me amusement parks are kind of a strange thing because the first amusement park I was ever really at was Cedar Point, which is a pretty darn nice park, or at least it was the last time I was there. But I worked there the first 2 summers that I ever went there. I was an employee there for the season.
Mhm.
And so, like, because that was my first real exposure and I was there a lot, in my mind, that's the standard of what a park should be.
Right.
And so if I go to, we're in the Pittsburgh area. So if I go to, say, Kennywood or Idlewild, in my head, I'm comparing them to Cedar Point, and they're not. They don't have the same budget. They don't have, all the things. And I'm not saying that they're bad parks, but they don't hold themselves to the same standard that Cedar Point holds itself to. And so I think that's where you have to be conscious with your home group or your group down at the local game shop that that's not the standard they aspire to. And it's unfair, and you mentioned even it's unfair to hold yourself to that standard because unless you're a professional actor, you don't have the tools at the same level they do. At least not likely.
Yeah, it is unfair to hold yourself to that. It is very much an unrealistic standard. Unless, maybe you are a professional actor. If you are, please hit us up. We'd like to talk. Um,
Yeah.
but no, it's one of those things where I think it just doesn't help a lot of people, and it does give exposure and that's great, but it doesn't help a lot of people that are have that mindset of if I can't do it perfectly, what's the point in doing it? And I think, I fall into that sometimes. I get that paralysis of like, oh, if I can't do this perfectly, then I'm just gonna quit. And don't nobody's perfect, and Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop RPGs in general are such a subjective thing that the question I always ask is everybody having fun? As long as
Mhm.
everybody's having fun in whatever way you feel is fun, then you're not doing anything wrong.
Exactly. As to, the other half of that question being Kickstarter and how that's I mean, I think that has really enabled a lot of smaller companies to make a splash.
Yeah.
If you look at, for example, well, obviously the most recent one being Magpie with the Avatar Kickstarter, which just obliterated previous records for funding for a tabletop RPG on the Kickstarter platform. But even companies like, say, Free League or Free Legon, depending on, if you wanna use the English or Swedish version of the name, they've made a model out of, putting their games on Kickstarter and getting those. They use it really almost more as a presale tool, I think, but it works very well for them. They've grown to be a force in the industry rather quickly. It's enabled other things like, the Coyote and Crow Kickstarter that I think just barely topped $1 million a couple months ago. It's largely being produced by native people and all those things, but, that's a project that probably never would have gotten off the ground without being able to go to a large, highly visible platform and get the exposure. Even, like I said, I think Kickstarter has changed a lot for the industry in that it kind of gives smaller companies, people, whatever, with big ideas, a way to get out there and get noticed and actually produce more as opposed to, well, okay, if I print, X number of copies of the book, can I get rid of them all? And they're having to lay all that money out from the start, where with Kickstarter, they can get money up front to fund their print runs or whatever, which is not cheap.
No.
So, I mean, I think that's helped the broader development of the industry a good bit.
Yeah, I completely agree. So moving on, not to cut us short on that one, but I think we've sort of hit the nail on the head. Question from who is this? GM Hooley? Never heard of him.
No.
No. Have any of you caused one or more of your players to openly have an emotional reaction to a PC or NPC death? And how did you handle it? I'll let you go first on this one because I think you have an answer to that question. At least in the time that we gamed together, just before I got there,
Now I'm confused.
back when we used to play together in real life.
Right. I don't no, I never killed anyone's character.
No, but your player character had an open emotional reaction.
Oh, okay. Okay, there we go. I know what you're talking about now. Um,
Yeah, back into place with the thing.
no, okay, so as a GM, no, I've never had this happen. I did what you're referring to was kind of an in-character reaction to another PC's death.
Hmm.
Where, yeah, my character kind of took it pretty hard, and for lack of a better way to say it, I don't want to say snapped, but sort of, and was, like, so to speak, just kind of a resigned yet determined walking off for vengeance kind of type deal. But as far as my sense of this question was more of, have you been at the table when the player had an emotional reaction to the PC or NPC death?
And I think I can't say that that's not true. That's not true. I've been at the table where a player had a emotional reaction to an NPC death, or actually a player character death. And it wasn't their player character, it was another. I was playing with some friends of mine who we were all very close, and yeah, just some stuff had happened, and it wasn't an inappropriate reaction, but the players, we some stuff had happened with one of the players at the table, and we'd taken a long hiatus from the game because of that, and felt that it was time to go back. And it was just a culmination of real life emotions plus in-game emotions. And yeah, I've been there and seen it. I haven't run anything I haven't run anything where I was in charge of that situation, but I
Yeah.
was there when there was grieving, essentially.
Yeah, I've witnessed it, I've never presided over it, so to speak.
Yeah. And do I think I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, you become attached to these characters, and depending on how invested you are in the game and you get invested in the people that you're playing with, realistically, you're spending a lot of time with the people at the table. You figure a short session or a short game is, what, 5-10 sessions.
Yeah.
And then you get into longer running campaigns where you're playing 100 plus,
Mhm.
and you've been playing with these people for a long time. You've been getting invested in their characters realistically. And I mean, it changes based on player type. If you're not, maybe you're very analytical and you don't get invested in the characters. Well, that's your player type. But, some people get really invested in each other's characters, and I can understand, and then, like I said, sometimes real life comes into the picture and sort of throws a wrench in things. And I think that's where hopefully soon we're going to have someone on to talk about the safety toolkit and being safe when playing the game, because at the end of the day, it is a game.
Yeah, and I think this treads into that area because, yeah, emotions and here's the thing about it, right? Like, I don't tend to it's not that I don't love my characters or whatever, but I don't get attached to them in that way. Even if I'm feeling the emotion, there's a intellectual disconnect between it being, what do you wanna say, real factual that's not the right way to say it. I'm conscious I'm playing a game,
Yeah, it's the difference between reality and playing pretend.
but I remember something I heard someone that came to speak at our high school. They were talking about something, and obviously this is years ago, but the phrase that sticks in my head was he was talking about something. And he said, and people will call it puppy love, but the thing you have to remember about puppy love is that it's still real to the puppies.
Yeah.
And I think that sums it up.
I don't fault anybody who gets emotionally attached to the characters, to the stories. Like I said, I was there. I've been through that. It's difficult because you get attached to the people playing the characters and you associate those people with that character. And that's where I sort of get hung up sometimes. It's not so much of the character itself, but more of the people that I played with. I'm attached to those people. You know what I mean? Like I'm friends with them and known them for a long time now, and you know what I mean?
Mhm.
I understand when people get emotionally attached or upset or anything along those lines. I just haven't, not necessarily personally myself, but it's not anything bad on that end. Number 7 is, who is your favorite NPC you've created? Hey Steve, how do you say, is it Big Papa Pump? Is that what it is?
That's what it's a contraction of, yes.
Okay. Um, do you have a specific one? Because I have a couple.
I think the first one that springs to mind, and may only because it's one of the most recent ones for me, was actually is kind of a weird thing. It's an NPC that you created in a game that I was running, so I got to play them.
Oh, Dubs, yeah.
Well, no, not so much Dubs,
Oh,
but, the machine.
the machine. Oh,
Yes,
yeah, yeah. Um,
which you just sort of went, "Oh, yeah, I have this guy that, I pay to answer the payphone down in front of my apartment building. I call him the answering machine." And you just sort of and so I just I remember having some not huge, but moderately large argument with your character in his voice that, as I recall, had the whole table just
dying,
you
yeah, yeah. The table was really laughing at that, and that was, oh man, I forgot about the machine. Oh,
'cause he didn't realize it, and then he was trying to tell you he wasn't, kind of offended that you were referring to him as a machine.
yeah. But I Dubs wasn't meaning anything bad by it. He was just, oh yeah,
No,
you're the machine.
yeah, in Dub's mind, it was a compliment, and we just sort of riffed on it for a little bit, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, I think my favorite NPC is my reoccurring NPC, which he's not going to end up in anything. He's usually in my Dungeons and Dragons games. I stole this character named Bomar, and Bomar is a baker. And Bomar usually when I play D&D, Bomar was the baker, the blacksmith, the tavern owner. Bomar ran one whole town by himself. Like I remember telling a story where I pretty much had everybody convinced that there was nobody else in this town except for Bomar. Bomar just, you would walk into a building and this big dude would come sort of barreling out from behind and he'd be all out of breath and, "Oh, can I help you today?" And my table was like, "Okay." And then they went to the blacksmith. They're like, "Oh, I'm gonna go see about getting my weapons sharpened." "All right, go over to the blacksmith." And I said, "You see the same guy sort of come barreling out behind. He's really out of breath. Hello, how can I help you today?" And I had them convinced that there was nobody else in this town except for Bomar. It was just Bomar. And he was my favorite. He's my favorite NPC for D&D just because it's just so funny to throw your players into this town where there's only one dude that does everything.
Mhm.
And to watch the players react is because they're, it's like, oh, who am I gonna meet over at the magic shop? Nope, it's gonna be Bomar. You know who it's gonna be. He's just gonna be Bomar at the magic shop. And it got to a point where one of my players was like, "I'm gonna start breaking into houses and see if it's just Bomar in the houses." I'm like, "Go for it." And I rolled on a check to see, because I figured what I did was I rolled behind my screen and I figured if it was low, Bomar, there was just gonna be anybody in the house that they were breaking into. And if it was high, it was just gonna be Bomar sitting on the couch like watching the fire.
Mhm.
And I rolled a nat 20 on a d20, and so they bust into this house and they break in, and they're like, "All right, so anybody in the house?" I'm like, "Well, there's somebody in the living room." They're like, "Okay, who is it?" And I'm like, "It's Bomar sitting in a recliner watching the fire." Oh, that was my favorite NPC because it's just messing with my players in this way that And it's a nothing town. It's not like it's super important, but it was just a fun way of giving a break. Sometimes you need that little bit of comedy break from the super serious games.
No, that's true.
And then we've talked about Dubs before. Dubs is my favorite player character NPC. And then let's take a look at something here. What does one do with that one player who always plays a rogue?
Well, I mean, my gut reaction is to say if they're having fun with it, let them play the rogue.
Yeah, that's usually my go-to. I have a buddy that I've sort of joked with him before, and he's like, "No, you're right." He's like, "That's the kind of character I like to play, so that's what I build." He always plays a paladin. He always plays the same paladin, and I just let him do it. Like, especially and I'll sort of get into this a little bit, but in modern Dungeons and Dragons, there's no need to be like, the party composition demands that there be one of each class. That's not necessary. There's so many different flavors of each of the classes now that you can absolutely just, if they want to play a rogue and somebody else wants to play a rogue, cool. Let them all play rogues. There's no need to be so gatekeeping. Like back in the day, back when Dungeons and Dragons, and I sort of harp on this now, back when Dungeons and Dragons was deadly, yeah, there was a need for proper party composition. You had to make sure you had damage dealers, tanks, healers, all of that. But now, no, there's no reason to fight with them. Just let them play the rogue.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like, we've said it before. At the end of the day, it's about having fun. And if that's how that's their fun, okay. That's my sense of it.
That's my sense of it too. It's just one of those things.
I mean, yeah, I don't like to play the same character over and over again. That's just not me. But
No, but some people do. Some people, that's all they know and that's all they really want to play. Like I said, I have my buddy, he plays paladins and he does a great job of it. So I just let him play paladins. I don't argue with him. I don't give him a hard time because not that I'm like, "Oh man, all you do is play paladins." I give him a hard time about it, but that's just my dynamic with my friends. But at the end of the day, that's where he has fun. That's how he has fun, so I let him do his thing.
yeah.
And that was by J Meyer 33.
All right. Want me to read the next one?
Yeah, sure. We're about halfway through these.
This comes from Ghost GM, and the question is: if you could choose one without having the others, which one do you think is better in the long run? Mechanical advancement, essentially new spells, loot, weapons, story advancement, which is of course kind of self-explanatory, or character advancement, feelings, attitudes, relationships, motivations, and such.
Yeah. I think character advancement, in my opinion, is always better, but that's just because, in my opinion, I've been getting away from mechanically advanced games and getting more into narratively advanced games.
Yeah, that's well a bit where I'm at too. It's hard to pick between character and story because they kind of go hand in hand, I think.
Yeah, they do, but I still think character's better than story advancement's great, but the characters drive the story. And seeing characters grow in the same like seeing characters grow in my opinion is more important than seeing the story progress.
Yeah. Sorry,
Character
technical
advancement.
snafu there.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I would say yeah, I'm with you. I think character probably would be my first choice, followed by story, and then probably mechanical as my last choice.
Yeah, I think mechanical's great. I just where I'm at gaming wise at this point is that I'm more in it for the narrative and the story and the characters than I am for, oh man, look how good I can do the thing.
Yeah. The next few were ones that I wrote up because I wasn't sure how many people we were going to have asked questions. So,
Let's actually skip yours.
okay.
Unless you had one in particular you really wanted to cover.
Not, I mean, they were just kind of conversation points more than anything.
Okay. Alicio asks how to add a lot more emotion to the story. Um, I think stakes, and that sort of gets into player involvement,
Mm-hmm.
which honestly, we've done sort of one episode on player involvement, but we could do a whole series on it.
Yeah.
To get more emotion, it's hard to quantify sometimes because, like I said, it does sort of boil into you have to have that player involvement, and then raising your stakes and making sure everybody's invested. That's how you get more, in my opinion. That's how the easiest way to get more in emotion.
Yeah, it falls into buy-in and player involvement. And Steve, did I mention when we started this that we had a bunch of questions about player engagement, and so we're probably going to save those and do a whole episode on that?
Yeah, you did mention that to me, but I don't think you mentioned it on the show.
Okay, now I have.
Yeah. So, but no, I think honestly that's where you should start is making sure that your buy-in's very high. Once you know your players are invested, then it sort of gets a little bit easier to get that emotional attachment. And to amp up the emotions is just to realistically, sometimes we talk about going crazy and getting a little wild and doing the weird things. But I think one of the ways that's important to bring up and to raise the emotion in a room is to realistically raise the emotion in a room. Give them a genuine threat, give them a genuine problem. As long as they're bought in and the players are invested, that becomes a whole lot easier.
Yeah. And at the same point, emotion is a thing you do need to be, to a certain point, careful with.
Yeah, and we're going to get into that, I think, with Safety Toolkit as well.
Yeah.
So moving on from that, to another one from Alicio. What have been some epic moments when the players get into character at the highest degree? Epic moments, I have a couple. I mean, we just talked about your character you being a player and getting into character and having that. I remember getting to that table and everybody being like, "Oh man, Steve's character, he just went nuts and like walked off." And like, yeah, mine are more goofy than I think some of my best moments and craziest moments. Like I talked about, I had a player who had to vacate the table for a little while and sort of was in and out of the group, and I just said, "Oh, well, you're playing a monk. We'll send you off to this church." And he always joked about, he's like, "Oh yeah, I get up and I make breakfast for everybody and all this stuff." And so my players knew he was coming back, and somebody said, "Oh, well, so and so's back." And I just remember one of my players going, "Oh, I need to go to the church." And so they went to the church. They walked in the doors, and they in the loudest, yelling, shouting tone, they yell, "Bring us the breakfast maker." And it was this like goofy but epic moment that you couldn't have scripted if you wanted to. That's one of my favorites. That's one of my favorite epic moments. It's not some sort of epic battle. It's just them wanting to get back together with their friend, and that was fun.
Yeah. I would say one of my more memorable kind of in character moments was, I know I've told you about this. I don't think I've mentioned it on the show, but I was playing a 3-5 game years ago, and I was playing this very not bright dwarven barbarian. And we were in this dungeon and came up against, I want to say, 3 Barghest.
Mm.
And I don't remember what level we were, but we weren't, I wouldn't say, any higher than maybe 5th. And there was only 2 of us in the party. And my character, through strangely concocted backstory, thought that the Aarakocra cleric, or not Aarakocra, Kenku cleric, I think, that was with us was his brother, like legit flesh and blood brother.
Mm-mm.
So combat opens up, and I want to say he won initiative, and I hit a massive crit, and I one-shot one of the Barghest. So one of the other Barghest, like, well, he's a threat. So they hit me with a charm effect, which of course I promptly failed to save.
Right.
So for me, this is one of I absolutely loved trying to play out being charmed and like wanting to save the other player character, who my character thought was his brother, against these creatures that now weren't his enemy either. In that sort of how to play that out. That for me, I love that, because it was a challenge, and to try and figure out how where his brain would go, and that how does he protect his brother? You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it was.
No, I understand completely. It's sort of kind of like if you charmed Drax, like
Kind of, yeah.
yeah. epic moments. I always think about epic moments in gaming, and like we were both Critical Role fans. I'm still sort of a fan. I pay attention to it. I just not always caught up on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think about all the epic moments when they were gaming, and that, that goes back to, well, not everything's Critical Role, but a lot of their stuff is genuine too. I think of all the stuff, and some of the best epic moments aren't even this epic thing happens. It's more of like all the times that Percy and Grog got into shenanigans.
Mm-hmm.
Or, in personal games, it's all the times that just goofy things happened, chasing stuff around dungeons and just all the shenanigans, which is what I live for in games. I live for the goofy moments and I live for the serious moments, but yeah.
But it's the genuine moments that stick with you, whether they be
Yeah.
goofy or serious.
Yeah, it's the genuine, like, and so with that, we've reached the end of our list.
Mm-hmm.
And it's time we get to Game of the Week.
Game of the week.
Game of the week. Game of the week.
You want to get going on Game of the Week here? I need to bring mine back up.
Sure, I'll start one off. This one here's what I do a lot of times for Game of the Week, folks. I'll be poking around drive-through and I'll go, oh, that looks interesting. Add to wish list. And then when it comes back to time for Game of the Week, when we're doing a show, I open up the wish list and go, oh yeah, that one. So this is one that I found a while back, put on the wish list, and then actually someone I was chatting with on Discord brought it up that they'd bought it and said it was kind of interesting. And it's a game called Cryptomancer. And it's, I guess, cyber fantasy? I'm not really sure. It's okay. The blurb is Cryptomancer is a tabletop role-playing game made for hackers by hackers. It features an original fantasy setting and gameplay informed by diverse security disciplines: information security, physical security, intelligence analysis, clandestine tradecraft, and risk management. Players assume the role of characters on the run from a shadowy organization that rules the world through mass surveillance, propaganda, and political coercion. And so it appears to be some sort of combination of fantasy and like cyber hacking. Like the cover art it's a really neat image of what would appear to be some sort of elf with this like crystal thingy and lines coming off it like magic, or like it's some sort of like data hollow crystal type thing. I mean, PDF is $20. So, it's a little pricey to buy just on a whim, but it is 430 some pages. So, like I said, it does look interesting, at least in concept. Might be something to buy as a resource at some point. I don't know. Maybe watch it, see if it goes on sale for me anyway. But, yeah, that's mine. Like I said, it's called Cryptomancer, and it's from Land of Nop, LLC. And that'd be NOP.
Mine's a cyberpunk game called Hardwired Island.
Mm-hmm.
Art style sort of cyberpunk anime, set in 2020. Looks like, from everything I can gather, you just need a D6 to play the game, or it uses D6 to play the game. I'm sorry, not just one. Just sort of a cool cyberpunk RPG. I don't know how else to say it. That's $30 for the PDF. Was a Kickstarter title. It just recently came out, maybe a couple months ago, June 9th.
Yeah, I remember seeing stuff on it.
Just sort of, they call it a retro future cyberpunk TTRPG inspired by 90s anime. Hey, that's everything you just said, all of the words that make me excited about a game. So, yeah, so check that out. Seems like a cool game. Like I said, not cheap, not too expensive, $30. You make your own decisions.
Yeah.
And with that, I want to thank you for listening. Remind you that our Discord is out there. We do post every day in the Discord. There's always some sort of conversation happening. As soon as I'm over my sickness, more TikToks will be coming. If you're following us on TikTok, which I don't think I ever got you the link for. Trying to think if there's anything else. I want to remind you to be kind to one another and get out there and play some RPGs.
Yep. Take care, y'all.
Intro and outro music by the band 12 Noon. You can email us at meandsteverpg@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter and RPGs. Find us on Facebook at Me and Steve RPG Podcast, on Discord at Me and Steve RPGs, and as always, all of these links are in the show notes. Thank you, and be kind to one another.
How much for the cigar?
Cigar, $20, dog. You gotta go down the street to the store and buy that.